All right, so we're going to try another example here. I want you to kind of watch and maybe try it yourself. But the first thing we're going to start out with is making sure that we can take this 120 and pop it right inside the first rung of our ladder, if you will. Okay, and then we always divide by the smallest number possible. So we're going to divide by a 2. That gives me 60. We're going to divide again. The smallest number again that goes in is 2. That gives me 30. All right, and then we divide again, still a 2. Don't go with 3. I know it's tempting, but don't go with 3. That gives you 15. Now the smallest number that can divide into 15 is 3. It gives me 5. Smallest number can go into 5 is 5, so that gives me 1. All right, so remember, our next step is to circle pairs. So I've got a pair of 2's right there, and another pair. Oop, no, I do not. That's all the pairs I have. Only have a single pair. So if that's all I have is a single pair of 2's, then what we're going to do here is actually, that's the only guy that actually comes out to the front of our radical. We have just a single pair of 2's that's going to come out in front of our radical. So our answer is simply going to be a single pair of 2's, so a 2, square root of, all of these guys are boxed up. So that means that they all go inside the radical. And now that seems a bit silly because what our answer actually is that single 2, and then all of those numbers are being multiplied. So 2 times 3 is 6, 6 times 5 is 30. And that's our final answer, 2 square root of 30. Let's try another example here. And you'll see a few extra things happening in this middle example. One is we already have a 3 outside. And basically what you are doing there is that 3 is already on the outside, and he's just going to wait out there for his friend to come out and join him, right? He's already on the outside, so just ignore him for now, but don't forget about him. Okay, he's already out there. And then we also have some variables. And I'm going to ask you to ignore the variables for just a second as well, because we're just going to focus on the 320. Because we have to figure out what this 320 actually is before we can focus on the x or the y. So again, we're going to put that 320 inside the first rung of our ladder, and we're going to divide it by our smallest number possible. In this case, that is 2, right? So if we divide that by 2, we're going to be left with 160. All right, again, put that in the rung of the ladder. Divide by 2 again, we're left with 80. Divide by 2 again, we're left with 40. Divide by 2 again, we're left with 20. Divide by 2 again, we're left with 10. Divide by 2 again, we're left with 5. Divide by 5, because that's the only number that goes into 5 is 5. So we're left with 1. So we're finally done with our ladder. You'll notice that for the most part, the numbers that are going to be used again and again and again on the outside here, the numbers that are going to be used are almost always going to be the same ones. So we're pretty much only going to use the numbers 2, 3, 5, and 7. Unless you get to like something where there's just a 13 left, well, obviously you got to divide by 13, right? But the 2, 3, 5, and 7 are your most common numbers that we're going to divide out. That's because those are our lowest primes. All right, so you wouldn't ever divide by a 4 because you can't divide by 4. When you could have, if you're dividing by 4, that means you should actually be dividing by 2, because we always want to divide by the smallest number that can go in. All right, back to the actual lesson. We're now going to circle. So if I'm going to circle my pairs, I have a pair of 2's right there. I have another pair of 2's right here. And then I have actually one last pair of 2's right here. Of course, my poor lonely 5 doesn't have anybody again, right? So that 5 is by himself. So here's what I want us to remember. What I don't want you to forget is the fact that this 3 was already on the outside. So a lot of people have forgotten about him by now, and we can't. We can't forget about that 3. So what I want you to do is I want you to draw an arrow with that 3 all the way down, and that 3 is going to come down and join us. He's already on the outside, So that's actually the very first thing that I'm going to write, is I'm going to write that 3 down. And then I'm going to bring everybody else that was on the in pairs to join us, right? So I have another pair of 2s, I have another pair of 2s, and I have another pair of 2s. Now, at this point, I would normally write square root of 5. But the reason I'm not is because we've forgotten about x and y. We can't forget about x and y. So what we do is, instead of writing square root of 5, I'm going to actually save some room. It's sort of like saving a seat at the movies or saving a seat in the cafeteria for your friend. You know they're coming, they're just not there yet. So we're going to save a seat for x and save a seat for y, and then write the square root of 5. Okay? So this part's going to be a little interesting, because the way I would normally teach this in class is where I'd have you put up 2 fingers on your hand, because if you have x squared, what that really means is that you have 2 x's, right? You have an x times an x. If you have y cubed, that means you have 3 y's, y times y times y. And so it's easy on your fingers to just kind of like group your fingers together, right? But here, since we don't have our fingers up, we're going to have to just circle. So you'll notice that since we have x squared, just like I circled my 2's, I'm going to circle a pair of x's. So I have 1 pair of x's. With the y's, same idea. Since I have a pair of y's right there, I circle that pair of y's. This y doesn't have anybody, so I put it in the box, just like I did with my numbers. So let's go down to the seats we saved. I saved a seat for x. How many pairs did I have? I just had a single pair, right? So I write a single x to the 1 right there. For the y's, how many y's did I have? Just a single y pair as well. So y to the 1. But what about the boxed up y? That boxed up y didn't have a pair. So remember, anything that's boxed goes inside. So that y goes in the inside of the radical. So I know this looks messy. It's definitely difficult writing on my screen instead of writing on the board. But let's simplify what this all says. Let's multiply all my numbers together. So 3 times 2 is 6. 6 times 2 is 12. 12 times 2 is 24. I multiply those together. The x and the y are there, and the square root of 5y is inside. That, folks, is your simplified version of that crazy square root from the very beginning. Okay? So it definitely takes some practice, but the better you get at it, the easier it becomes. All right? So I want you to press pause and try out this one on your own, and then you can come back to the video and see if you're able to get it. Good luck. All right, so here I've worked it out. You can see I divided by 2, then 3, then 3, then 5. So that gave me a 2, but didn't have any pairs. The 3 had 2 3s, so a pair of 3s, and a single 5. So you can see that I brought my negative 2 down. The 3 is the only number that gets to come outside. I saved the 2 and the 5 went in the room, went inside the square root. And then if you look at your a and your b to the 4th, the a is actually just being raised to the 1st power. So you got to be really careful there. That's just a single a. So you don't have a pair. So that a has to go inside the radical. So it's by itself. But then the b to the 4th means b times b times b times b. So you're left with b, you have 2 pairs of b. So that's why we ended up with b squared on the outside, because it was b times b. There's 2 b's, 2 pairs of b, so that's b squared. So we finally simplify our answer here. We're left with negative 6 b squared square root of 10 a. That would be your final answer, because that looks messy, because we're left with our negative 2 and 3 get multiplied together, b squared, 2 times 5 is 10, and so there you go. So really important that we practice simplifying these square roots, as it'll come up, and we gotta definitely have to practice it for today's lesson. Good luck, have fun.